I moved into the quiet suburb of Maple Ridge 3 years ago, thinking I'd finally found peace after 20 years of chaos, blood, and noise. After retiring from the Navy SEALs, I wanted nothing more than a normal life, morning coffee with my wife on the porch, the smell of pine and fresh-cut grass, and maybe the occasional weekend barbecue with the neighbors. I thought I'd earned that calm. After all, when you've seen what I've seen overseas, dusty villages lit by fire, comrades breathing their last under foreign skies, you learn to appreciate stillness like it's sacred. My wife, Hannah, loved the house the moment she saw it. It wasn't big or fancy, just a cozy 2-story home with a wraparound porch and a yard large enough for her rose garden. She was the kind of woman who made everything feel like home, warm meals, laughter echoing through the halls, the smell of cinnamon whenever she baked. After years of deployments, I'd missed that more than I ever admitted. For the first time in decades, I started to believe life could be peaceful. But peace, I've learned, doesn't last, not for men like me. The first sign of trouble came disguised as a friendly handshake. The Homeowners Association, HOA for short, welcomed us with forced smiles and printed pamphlets. They introduced themselves as the guardians of community standards, but the way their president, a man named Carl Jennings, looked at me reminded me more of a drill sergeant evaluating a new recruit. Carl was in his late 50s, slick gray hair, perfect teeth, and eyes that screamed control. The man loved authority more than oxygen. At first, it was minor things. Your fence is 2 inches too high. Your mailbox isn't the approved color. The flag in your yard violates Code 4B. They'd leave notes, sometimes with fines, sometimes just warnings. I'd laugh it off. After all, I'd faced warlords and mercenaries. What was an HOA to me? But Hannah didn't like confrontation. She'd just sigh, say, "Let's fix it," and head out with a paintbrush or toolkit. She wanted peace as much as I did. Then came the incident with the flagpole. I'd mounted a tall aluminum flagpole in front of our porch, a proper one, the kind that stands firm even in high wind. I'd flown the stars and stripes, the SEAL Trident flag below it, and the POW, MIA banner beneath that. A week later, a notice arrived, non-compliant display of multiple flags. The fine was $250. I went to the next HOA meeting to dispute it. The room was filled with folding chairs and bad coffee. Carl sat at the front beside a woman who looked like she'd been born angry, Karen Miller, the vice president. She had the kind of smile that made you feel like she was already thinking about how to ruin your week. When I approached the microphone, the room got quiet. "I'm here about the fine for my flagpole," I said. "Those flags represent fallen brothers. They're not coming down." Karen's lips curled. "We respect your service, Mr. Carson, but community guidelines are clear. Only one flag may be displayed per property." I looked straight at her. "Then change the guidelines." Carl gave me that tight-lipped grin of his. "We'll take it under advisement. In the meantime, please comply." I walked out without another word. That was the beginning of the war. The following weeks, strange things started happening. Our trash wasn't picked up, even though every other house on the street had service. Someone scratched my truck, deep, deliberate lines. Late one night, I heard footsteps outside our bedroom window. When I opened the door, whoever it was had already gone, but there was a note pinned to the porch rail: "Follow the rules, or pay the price." I didn't tell Hannah at first. She was already stressed with her new job at the clinic, and I didn't want to worry her. But I started keeping my M4 carbine closer, just in case. Old habits die hard. Then, one morning, Hannah came running into the kitchen holding a letter. Her hands were shaking. "John, they've fined us again. $10,000, for unauthorized exterior modification." I frowned. Modification? For what? "The security cameras," she said. "They're saying we didn't get approval to install them." I felt the blood rise in my neck. "They're legal. And necessary." Carl had crossed the line, and he knew exactly what he was doing. Those cameras were my way of protecting my family. But apparently, in Maple Ridge, security was considered an offense. That night, I decided to confront him. I walked to his house, which was 2 streets down, immaculate lawn, perfect symmetry, not a leaf out of place. Carl opened the door with that same smug grin. "Evening, John," he said. "Something wrong?" "Yeah," I said. "You and your little empire." He chuckled. "Now, that's not neighborly. You've been harassing my wife and vandalizing my property. You're crossing into criminal territory." His eyes flickered for a second, then softened back into arrogance. "Be careful with your accusations. We're just enforcing order." "Order?" I stepped closer. "You don't know what disorder looks like, Carl." "But I do." He didn't respond. He just shut the door in my face. I walked home in silence, but something about the look in his eyes told me he wasn't done. The next day, Hannah called me from the porch. "John, there are police outside." When I stepped out, 2 men in black tactical uniforms were standing in the driveway. They wore badges that said HOA Enforcement Division. Their SUV had flashing lights, but no department name, just the HOA logo. "Morning, sir," one said, hand on his belt. "We're here regarding a violation notice." "Violation?" I asked. "Who the hell are you supposed to be?" "Community compliance officers," he said. "We have authority from the Maple Ridge HOA." I laughed. "You're kidding, right?" The second man stepped forward. "Sir, we need you to come with us to discuss the matter at headquarters." "Headquarters?" I repeated, still trying to process the insanity. "You boys are playing dress-up. Get off my property." The first man's expression hardened. "Sir, refusal to comply will result in further penalties." "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "And if you're not law enforcement, this conversation is over." That's when one of them grabbed Hannah by the arm. She cried out, twisting away, but he held on. I saw her eyes fill with pain and fear, and in that instant, something inside me snapped. I moved before I even thought. Years of combat reflex took over. My hand went to the sidearm on my hip, and my voice came out like steel. "Let her go." The man hesitated, but not long enough. I saw him tighten his grip, and Hannah screamed. That's when I heard the sickening crack of bone. Everything froze. Her knees buckled. I caught her before she hit the ground. My wife, my world, was gasping, holding her ribs, tears streaming down her face. The men stepped back, suddenly realizing they'd gone too far. "What the hell did you do?" I growled. "It was an accident," one stammered. I stood, every muscle in my body coiled tight. "Leave. Now." They turned, muttering something about reporting to Carl, and drove off in their fake patrol car. I stayed there, holding Hannah in my arms, her breathing ragged. That was the moment peace died in Maple Ridge. That night, after taking her to the hospital and hearing the words, 2 fractured ribs, I sat in the dark of my living room, the M4 resting across my knees. The old instincts had woken up. The SEAL in me was back. And this time, I wasn't fighting for a flag or a mission. I was fighting for my wife. The night after Hannah's ribs were broken, the air inside our home turned heavy, thick with silence and the low hum of rage. I sat in the corner of the living room, every light turned off except the faint blue glow from the street lamp outside. My M4 leaned against the wall beside me, the weapon cleaned, loaded, ready. Old instincts crept back in like ghosts from deployment, the smell of gun oil, the rhythm of my heartbeat syncing with the click of a charging handle. It had been years since I'd touched that rifle for anything but maintenance, but now, it felt natural again, like shaking hands with an old friend. Hannah was asleep upstairs, dosed on painkillers. Every now and then, I'd hear her stir and let out a quiet groan, and my fists would clench all over again. That sound, that helpless, hurt sound, did something inside me I can't fully describe. It wasn't just anger. It was something deeper, older, darker. The part of me that had learned to kill when words failed. By dawn, I'd already made a plan. When you spend your life in special operations, you learn that victory doesn't come from brute force. It comes from intel, patience, and precision. So before I went after anyone, I needed to know exactly who those fake cops were, and where they came from. I started with the HOA's website. It was your typical suburban propaganda page, community guidelines, approved paint colors, neighborhood values. But buried deep in the contact section was something odd, a link labeled Compliance and Enforcement Division. It listed 5 names: Director Carl Jennings, Deputy Director Karen Miller, and 3 field officers, Rick Wallace, Todd Harper, and Dale Mendez. Rick. That name stuck out. When the officers showed up, one of them had a name tag that read R. Wallace. So, these weren't random imposters, they were part of Carl's personal enforcement team. I dug deeper. The division was registered as a private security entity, not law enforcement. I cross-checked their license number with the state registry, expired 2 years ago. Meaning they had no legal right to carry weapons, wear uniforms, or detain anyone. They'd broken into my home under false authority, assaulted my wife, and impersonated police officers. That wasn't an HOA violation. That was a federal crime. I printed every file, every screenshot, every violation notice they'd ever sent. I built a full dossier, then slid it into a thick folder marked in bold letters, Evidence. But I wasn't done. Next, I installed 4 more cameras around the property, night vision, motion sensitive, and connected directly to a cloud server. I wasn't going to let them sneak up again. Then I called my old friend from the teams, Marcus "Ghost" Donovan, who now ran a private investigations firm in Dallas. "John, it's been a while," he said when he picked up. "What's going on, brother?" "I've got a situation," I said. "Need some background on a guy named Carl Jennings and his crew." "Send me names and addresses," he replied without hesitation. "I'll dig." By noon, I sent him the files. Within 6 hours, he called back. "Jennings used to be a cop," Marcus said. "Fired 10 years ago for excessive force and falsifying reports. Tried to start his own security company, license revoked. He's been living off HOA management contracts ever since." "The others?" "Same kind of guys. Wannabe cops. Got kicked out of small-town departments for misconduct." So that's what I was dealing with, washed-up bullies hiding behind neighborhood bylaws. Men who couldn't cut it in real law enforcement, so they built their own fake empire. I could have gone straight to the sheriff with that information. But part of me wanted Carl to know I wasn't afraid. So I waited. 3 nights later, I saw movement on the camera feed. 2 silhouettes creeping along the side of the house, dressed in black again. One carried a crowbar. The other had a flashlight, scanning the yard. My pulse stayed steady. I didn't move. I watched them on the monitor, every step deliberate. When the first one reached the porch, I saw his face clearly, Rick Wallace. That was enough. I grabbed the M4, chambered around, and hit the porch light switch. The floodlights blasted on, white as day. "Freeze!" I barked, stepping out the front door, rifle trained. Rick dropped the crowbar, hands flying up. The second guy, Todd, by the look of him, stumbled back, blinded. "You're trespassing on private property," I said, voice cold. "You've got 5 seconds to explain yourself before I make a citizen's arrest." Rick stammered, "Carl told us to, 3 seconds. Look, we were just 2. They bolted before I even got to 1. Their SUV roared to life, tires screaming down the street. I let them go. The cameras had caught everything, faces, plates, audio. I uploaded it all to the sheriff's department tip line with an anonymous note, impersonating officers. Assault suspect. Proof attached. The next morning, I drove Hannah to her doctor's appointment. Her ribs were still sore, wrapped tightly under her shirt. She tried to act strong, smiling through the pain, but I saw the way she flinched every time she breathed deep. "John," she said softly, "please don't do anything crazy." I didn't answer. I just held her hand. When we came home, a letter was taped to the door. Notice of termination of ownership rights, effective immediately. At the bottom, signed, Carl Jennings, HOA Director. Hannah gasped. "He's trying to evict us." "Let him try," I said quietly. But inside, my blood boiled. They were doubling down. Not only had they hurt my wife, now they wanted to erase us from the neighborhood entirely. That afternoon, I met with the real sheriff, Deputy Lawson, a tall man with years of patience in his eyes. I handed him the evidence folder. He whistled low as he flipped through it. "You weren't kidding, Carson. These guys are way out of line. They assaulted my wife," I said flatly. "I want charges." "I'll start the paperwork," Lawson said. "But you need to stay calm. Don't take matters into your own hands." "I hear you," I said. But we both knew that was a lie. 2 nights later, it all came to a head. I was in the garage, cleaning my gear, when I heard engines outside. Not one, several. Headlights swept across the window. I peered through the blinds. 4 black SUVs were parked in front of my house, blocking the road. And then I saw them, 6 men in tactical vests, the same fake HOA officers, climbing out with flashlights and radios. They weren't here to talk. I woke Hannah and helped her down to the basement. "Stay here. Lock the door. Don't come out until I say." Her eyes widened. "John, what are you? Just trust me," I said. When I came back upstairs, the front door was already being kicked in. The frame splintered. Voices shouted, "Compliance inspection. Step out of the house." That was the last straw. I moved fast, silent, trained, precise. I crouched behind the hallway arch, M4 raised. The first man entered, Rick again. He swept the flashlight left, then right. I didn't fire. Not yet. I wanted them to see me first. "Carson," one of them barked. "By order of the HOA, you're under arrest for non-compliance." I stepped out of the shadows, weapon aimed dead center. "You made a big mistake coming here," I said. The second man lifted his rifle, airsoft, not real, but it didn't matter. I squeezed the trigger once, aiming high. The round shattered the ceiling beam, showering them with dust. They ducked instantly, panic setting in. "Drop your weapons," I commanded. They scrambled, shouting, cursing, one tripping over the other. Within 6 seconds, the fight was over, no one dead, but every fake cop face down, zip-tied, and disarmed. I'd emptied half the mag into the wall and ceiling, just enough noise to wake the neighborhood. When the real police arrived minutes later, they found 6 men on the ground and me standing there calmly, rifle unloaded and pointed down. Lawson stepped out of the cruiser, eyes wide. "Jesus, Carson, what the hell happened here?" Home invasion, I said simply. Caught on camera. He nodded slowly, scanning the scene. You're lucky no one's dead. Not luck, I said. Discipline. That night, as they hauled the fake cops away, Carl's car pulled up at the corner. He sat there watching, face pale, hands gripping the wheel. I walked over, calm as a storm before thunder. You sent them, I said. He didn't answer. Next time, I continued, you'd better come yourself. Carl's eyes flickered, but he didn't move. He just drove off into the dark. And I knew then, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The day after the raid, Maple Ridge turned into a crime scene wrapped in silence. Neighbors peeked from their blinds, whispering about gunfire and sirens, about the crazy ex-soldier who took down a SWAT team. The rumor mill spun fast, but no one came to ask questions directly. They were afraid, not of me, but of the truth. They'd seen what the HOA had become, not a community board, but a private militia with Carl Jennings at its head. The real police had taken the imposters into custody, but within 48 hours, they were out on bail. 6 men who'd broken into my home under false authority were back walking free, and Carl had lawyers, money, and influence. I knew what was coming next, retaliation through the courts. By that weekend, I was served with a lawsuit claiming defamation, assault, and property damage. They were trying to spin it, make me the aggressor, the violent vet who snapped. Hannah sat beside me at the table, pale and silent, the envelope trembling in her hands. John, this is insane. How can they even? They can, I said. And they will. It's how bullies operate. They attack until you either fold or fight. She reached across, taking my hand. I don't want you going back to that place, the one you go when you're angry. I squeezed her fingers gently. I don't either. But they brought that place to our doorstep. That night, I called Marcus again. Brother, he said, I heard about the raid. You handled it cleaner than most cops would've. You need backup? Not yet, I replied. But I need everything on Jennings, finances, contracts, political ties. If he's paying off judges or cops, I want proof. Give me 48 hours. I hung up and went to check the cameras. Every corner of the property was covered, each feed secure and synced to a backup drive. Still, I had the uneasy feeling of being watched. At 3 a.m., that feeling became real. A faint red dot danced across the living room curtain. It moved slowly, then vanished. Sniper laser, or maybe a rangefinder. Either way, someone was out there. I slipped into the hallway, silent as breath, and pulled the blackout blinds closed. Then I eased the rifle off the wall and went out the back door, barefoot, every step controlled. The night air was cold, thick with the smell of pine and rain. There, across the street, behind a hedge, a silhouette crouched, camera lens glinting faintly in the dark. I moved up along the fence line, low and quiet, like the dozens of raids I'd led overseas. I circled around, came up behind him, and pressed the muzzle of my sidearm against his shoulder blade. Drop it, I whispered. The man froze. Don't shoot. Don't, who sent you? Jennings. He just wanted photos, proof you're unstable. I yanked the camera from his hand and stepped into the light. He was barely 20, probably hired for a quick buck. Go back to him, I said, and tell him this, he's running out of moves. The kid nodded, stumbling away. By morning, the photos were already circulating, my house, the rifle on my porch, the night of the raid. Online gossip pages branded me the ex-SEAL vigilante of Maple Ridge. Carl was playing dirty, trying to ruin my reputation before the truth could surface. But he underestimated one thing, I had no reputation left to lose. By Sunday, Marcus called back. His voice was tight, urgent. "John, you're not gonna like this. Jennings has been funneling HOA money into a shell company registered in Florida. The same company owns those fake cop uniforms, the SUVs, and a warehouse about 20 miles from you." "What kind of warehouse?" "Private facility. Cameras, floodlights, and armed guards. He's running something bigger than harassment. You might want to take a look." I didn't hesitate. By sundown, I had a plan. I told Hannah I was heading into town to file paperwork at the sheriff's office. That wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. I parked 2 miles from the coordinates Marcus gave me, killed the engine, and trekked through the brush with a thermal scope and a silenced sidearm. From a ridge above, I saw the place clearly, a squat metal building surrounded by chain-link fencing, 2 guards at the gate, SUVs parked in rows. The same logo was stamped on the door, Maple Ridge Compliance Division. They'd built themselves a miniature police compound. Inside, through the scope, I saw crates stacked to the ceiling, boxes labeled tactical gear and field uniforms. But one crate caught my attention, arms and training materials, federal restricted. They were stockpiling weapons. I snapped photos of everything, license plates, personnel, shipments. The evidence was solid, but something in me wanted more than proof. I wanted to know why. Why would a failed cop and his cronies build a fake army under an HOA banner? So I waited. At midnight, a black pickup truck rolled in. The driver's door opened, Carl Jennings himself. He stepped out, shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize. The stranger wore a sheriff's badge. I zoomed in with the scope and caught his name tag, Sheriff C. Dalton. My stomach sank. That was the sheriff from the neighboring county, the one who'd been denying complaints from other neighborhoods. Now I understood. Jennings wasn't working alone. He had protection. The next morning, I went straight to Deputy Lawson's office and dropped the printed photos on his desk. His eyes went wide. "Good Lord. That's a federal offense." "Then get the feds involved," I said. "They've got illegal weapons, impersonation gear, and a sheriff on payroll." He nodded, picking up the phone. "I'll make the call." But by the time the FBI showed up 2 days later, the warehouse was empty. Everything, trucks, crates, files, gone. Wiped clean like it never existed. Marcus called again that night. "John, someone tipped them off. You've got a mole in law enforcement." I sat there in silence, staring at the dark yard. Hannah was upstairs asleep, unaware of how deep the rot went. "This isn't an HOA war anymore," I finally said. "This is corruption." The next few days were quiet, too quiet. No notes, no threats, no patrol cars. It felt unnatural, like the air before a storm. Then one afternoon, I came home to find our front window smashed. The words, "Get out," were spray-painted across the siding in red. Hannah was in tears, clutching the phone. "They called me at work," she whispered. "Said they know where we live, that they'll finish what they started." That was it. The last straw. I packed Hannah's things, loaded them into her car, and sent her to her sister's place 2 states away. "You're not coming back until this is over," I told her. She hugged me tight, her voice trembling. "Promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," I said, though we both knew promises meant nothing in war. Once she was gone, I turned the house into a fortress, reinforced doors, motion traps, hidden cameras. Then I sat down with Marcus over a secure line. "I've got one lead left," he said. Carl scheduled a private HOA board meeting tomorrow night. Locations listed as Community Operations Center, same warehouse address. He thinks no one's watching. "Perfect," I said. That night, I cleaned the rifle one last time. Every movement was deliberate, like a ritual, a memory of who I used to be. The man I'd buried when I left the SEALs. At exactly 2,100 hours, I parked a mile away and hiked through the woods again. The warehouse glowed under floodlights. 6 SUVs outside. Voices inside, laughter, music, the clink of glasses. I slipped up to a side window, peering through a crack in the blinds. There they were, Carl, Karen, the fake officers, and a few new faces. Papers and cash spread across the table. Carl raised a glass. "Gentlemen, to a job well done. The Carson problem is almost over. Once the court grants the injunction, we'll seize the property and sell it to our buyer in Austin." Karen laughed. "And the wife? Still out of town?" Carl smirked. "Recovering, I hope. Next time she won't stand in the way." Something inside me went cold. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the small drone Marcus had shipped me, a silent recon model the size of a hand. I launched it through the side vent, guiding it above the meeting table. The camera streamed everything, their faces, their words, the documents they were signing. "Got you," I whispered. When the meeting ended, I waited until they all drove off. Then I slipped inside. The place was half empty, but a single desk drawer caught my eye. Inside was a thick folder marked Acquisition Contracts, Private Enforcement Fund. Each contract listed properties acquired through non-compliance. Families driven out, houses resold at triple value, and profits funneled into Carl's shell company. It wasn't just my home, it was dozens across 3 counties. I took everything, every page, every file. As I walked out, headlights flashed across the yard. A voice shouted, "Freeze!" Carl stood there, gun drawn. I raised my hands slowly. "You're out late, Carl." His smile was venom. "You should have left when you had the chance." I saw the movement in his wrist before he pulled the trigger. I dove sideways as the shot cracked through the air, grazing my shoulder. Pain flared hot and bright. I fired once in return, not to kill, but to disable. His gun flew from his hand, skidding across the dirt. He fell to his knees, clutching his arm. "You think you can stop this? I own this town." "Not for long," I said. "You're done." I left him there bleeding, his own power crumbling around him, and disappeared into the night with every document that would end him. By sunrise, Marcus had already sent copies to the FBI, state attorney, and 3 major news outlets. For the first time in months, I felt something close to relief. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over, not until Carl Jennings was behind bars. When the sun rose over Maple Ridge the next morning, the neighborhood looked the same: birds on the power lines, sprinklers watering perfect lawns, kids riding bikes. But beneath that quiet surface, everything had changed. Carl's empire was collapsing. And I had lit the fuse. By noon, the story was everywhere. Ex-Navy SEAL exposes corrupt HOA crime ring, blared across national headlines. The FBI raid photos showed black SUVs being seized, fake badges stacked in evidence bags, and piles of counterfeit police gear. News vans swarmed the entrance of Maple Ridge, reporters sticking microphones in every direction. But not everyone was cheering. Some neighbors, terrified of what they'd been part of, turned on Carl instantly. Others, the ones who'd benefited from his protection, started whispering about me like I was the villain. The man who brought trouble to their doorstep. It didn't bother me. I'd been called worse on every continent on Earth. What did bother me was the silence. Carl had disappeared overnight. The FBI had warrants, the sheriff's office had alerts out, but no one could find him. The man who once strutted around my street in a golf cart with a clipboard had vanished like smoke. That evening, I was in the garage when the motion sensor beeped, front camera triggered. I checked the monitor. A car had stopped outside my gate. A woman stepped out, head down, hooded. Hannah. I rushed out before she even reached the porch. What are you doing here? I told you to stay away. She smiled faintly. It's over, John. The news said they caught everyone. I shook my head. Not everyone. She touched my arm gently. You can stop fighting now. Please. Come back to me. For the first time in weeks, I felt the anger drain a little. I held her close, breathing in the faint scent of her shampoo, something normal, something human. You shouldn't have come, I whispered. That night, we sat together in the living room, the first quiet meal we'd had since the chaos began. I even allowed myself to believe, for one fragile moment, that maybe it was over. But peace, I'd learned, is just the pause before another hit. At 2:47 a.m., the world exploded. A blast shattered the front windows, the concussion throwing me against the wall. Smoke, fire, and glass filled the room. Hannah screamed, clutching her side. I dragged her to the ground, instincts snapping into gear. Stay down. Another explosion rocked the garage, the car alarm blared, flames licking the ceiling. I grabbed her and rushed through the back door, out into the yard, behind the old oak tree. My heart pounded, not from fear, from fury. I scanned the street. A truck sped away, tail lights glowing red through the smoke. No plates. No mistake. Carl wasn't gone. He was cleaning up loose ends. By the time the fire department arrived, half the house was gone. Reporters showed up again, snapping photos as the flames died down. Lawson pulled me aside, face grim. C4 residue, he said. Professional-grade explosive. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. I nodded slowly. Then it's not over. He hesitated. John, we've got witness protection available if you and your wife want to. No, my voice was iron. I don't hide from men like him. Hannah looked at me, eyes glistening. Then what do we do? We finish it. 2 days later, Marcus flew in. We met in a diner just outside of town. He looked the same as always, broad shoulders, calm eyes, the steady presence of a man who'd seen too much and learned to carry it quietly. You've stirred up a hornet's nest, he said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were photos, Carl's truck, sighted twice in the last 24 hours near the state border. He's not running, Marcus continued. He's regrouping. My guy traced a few encrypted calls, looks like he's hired muscle. Ex-security contractors. Bad ones. Mercs, I muttered. How many? 3, maybe 4. Then it'll be a fair fight. Marcus smirked. You still got that calm, scary confidence. Never changes. It's not confidence, I said. It's resolve. That night, we staged the trap. If Carl wanted to finish what he started, I'd make sure he came straight to me, and nowhere else. I returned to the ruins of my house and set up motion lights across the property, a network of cameras linked to a silent alarm on my watch. I left one side of the house seemingly unguarded, the perfect blind spot, and waited. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Then, faintly, the crunch of gravel. A truck engine idled low. Through the scope, I saw movement, 4 figures advancing through the dark, weapons drawn, night vision goggles gleaming. Marcus's voice came over the earpiece. 4 targets confirmed. You good? Always. The first man reached the side fence, I let him through. The second followed, scanning the yard. I waited until all 4 were inside before triggering the remote floodlights. White light flooded the lawn. They froze. I stepped out from the shadow of the tree line, rifle raised. "You boys are trespassing." One lifted his weapon, too slow. A single shot cracked the night. He went down hard, screaming. The others scattered for cover, firing blindly into the dark. I moved fast, low, deliberate, every motion precise, every breath measured. Years of training weren't gone, they were muscle memory. Marcus flanked from the rear, his silenced pistol whispering through the chaos. 2 down in seconds. The last one dropped his rifle and raised his hands. "Where's Jennings?" I demanded. He spat blood. "You'll never find him. He's already gone." Wrong answer. He broke. "He's hiding at the old mill north of town. He said he's finishing this himself." Marcus looked at me. "You sure you want to go?" I checked the mag, then nodded once. "It ends tonight." The old mill sat by the river, abandoned for years, overgrown and half-collapsed. Perfect place for a final stand. We parked a quarter-mile away and went in on foot. Every step echoed against the cold earth. The moon hung low, silver and sharp. Inside, the place smelled of rust and old oil. Footprints in the dust, fresh. "Jennings!" I called out, my voice bouncing off the steel beams. "It's over. The FBI's got your files. The news has your face. You've got nowhere left to hide." For a long moment, nothing. Then a voice echoed from the shadows. "You think you can take everything from me and walk away?" Carl stepped out, holding a pistol, face pale and desperate. The once perfect HOA tyrant now looked like a ghost of himself, sweat dripping, eyes bloodshot. "You ruined me," he hissed. "My money, my company, my life. You took it all." "You did that yourself," I said. "You could have stopped the moment you broke her ribs." His face twisted. "That was an accident. Tell that to her scars." He lifted the pistol. "You don't get to judge me. You're a killer. Always have been. I saw it in your eyes the day you moved in." "Difference is," I said quietly, "I know what I am. You just pretend." For a heartbeat, the world froze. The wind howled through broken glass. Then he fired. The shot went wide. I moved forward, closing the distance before he could reload. The butt of my rifle connected with his arm, the gun clattered to the floor. He stumbled back, bleeding, cornered against a rusted column. "It's over," I said. He laughed bitterly. "You think locking me up will change anything? There are more like me, every HOA, every county. People love power. They'll always come back. Then I'll be ready." He lunged one last time, a desperate swing of a knife. I sidestepped, twisted his wrist, and sent him sprawling onto the concrete. The blade clanged beside him. When he looked up, I saw it, the fear. The realization that the control he'd built his whole life was gone. I holstered my weapon. "You're not worth the bullet." He didn't move as the sound of sirens grew closer. When the FBI and deputies burst through the doors minutes later, Carl Jennings was on his knees, hands on his head, surrounded by the wreckage of everything he'd built. Marcus glanced at me. "You did it." "No," I said quietly, looking at the shattered man on the floor. "We just ended it." The days that followed felt unreal. Federal charges, court hearings, media chaos, it all blurred together. The HOA was dissolved, the fake officers sentenced, and Carl faced over 20 counts of fraud, assault, and conspiracy. Through it all, Hannah stood by me, her strength more powerful than any weapon I'd ever carried. One evening, months later, we stood on the edge of what used to be our home. The house was rebuilt now, brighter, stronger, scar-free. She looked up at me and smiled softly. "You can finally rest," she said. I wrapped my arm around her, feeling the calm I'd been chasing for years finally settle. "Yeah," I said. "But if peace ever forgets where we live," she laughed. "You'll remind it? 6 seconds is all it takes." And for the first time in a long time, I smiled too. It took me a long time to understand that some wars don't end with the last shot, they end with silence. The kind that rings in your ears after everything else stops moving. That's what life became after Carl's arrest, quiet, but heavy. Hannah and I rebuilt the house together. Every nail, every beam, every inch of paint was a piece of our redemption. The community that once turned its back on us now came by with casseroles, condolences, and half-meant apologies. I didn't need their words, I saw the guilt in their eyes. Most of them had watched the tyranny grow in their own backyard and said nothing. Fear is a powerful leash. When the HOA was officially dissolved, the county held a meeting at the old community center. I was asked to attend, not as a defendant or a victim, but as a voice for what came next. The room was packed. Some were ashamed, some angry, some just curious. An older man in the front row raised his hand. "Mr. Walker, how do we keep something like this from happening again?" I looked around the room, people who'd lived next door for years, but never really seen each other. "You stop letting fear do your talking," I said. "You don't hand your rights to the loudest person in the room because they sound organized. Power doesn't need a badge to be abused, it just needs silence." A murmur spread through the crowd. For the first time, I saw understanding instead of judgment. Afterward, people came up to shake my hand. The sheriff, Lawson, stood by the door and nodded once. "You did good, son. You brought something rotten into the light." "I didn't do it alone," I said. "But I'll take the win." In the months that followed, we tried to find normal again. Hannah healed, physically and emotionally, but the scars stayed, faint reminders of what blind authority can do. She started volunteering with a group that helped HOA abuse victims across the state. Every time she got a letter from someone who'd found courage because of her, I saw her spirit come back a little more. As for me, I went back to work, not the Navy, not private security. I started teaching. Self-defense, discipline, situational awareness. At first it was just a few kids from the neighborhood. Then parents joined. Then veterans. Before long, we had a small facility, nothing fancy, but alive with purpose. People came to learn how to fight. What they left with was how not to be afraid. Still, I couldn't completely shake the past. The nights were the hardest, when the air was too still, and I'd wake up thinking I heard boots on gravel, the echo of danger long gone. Hannah would sense it before I spoke. She'd reach across the bed, fingers tracing the scar on my shoulder, the one I got long before this war, and whisper, "You're home." It grounded me every time. A year later, I was asked to testify in federal court at Carl Jennings' sentencing. The courthouse was a fortress that day, reporters, protesters, even ex-HOA members trying to catch a glimpse of their fallen leader. When I took the stand, Carl was already seated, cuffed, wearing an orange jumpsuit that did nothing to hide the arrogance still etched into his posture. The prosecutor asked me to describe the night my house was attacked. I did, every sound, every explosion, every scream. Not for the jury, not for the cameras, but for Hannah. When I finished, Carl met my eyes. "You think you're some kind of hero," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. The courtroom gasped, but the judge didn't stop him. I leaned forward. "No, Carl. I'm just a man who stopped pretending." He didn't respond after that. The judge sentenced him to 40 years without parole. When they led him away, I saw something flicker across his face, not hatred, not fear. Just emptiness. Like a man who'd finally realized power was the only thing that ever made him feel alive, and now it was gone. Outside, the crowd erupted in cheers and camera flashes. Reporters tried to corner me for statements, but I kept walking. I'd already said everything I needed to. The following spring, Maple Ridge bloomed again. Lawns grew wild and free, without letters in mailboxes threatening fines. The fences weren't all uniform, the mailboxes didn't match, and nobody cared. It looked messy, real, alive. One afternoon, a new family moved into the old Jennings house. A young couple with a baby girl. The father came over while unloading boxes. "You're John Walker, right? The guy who stood up to the fake HOA?" I nodded. He grinned. "Heard about you. Guess we owe you thanks for cleaning up this place." I smiled faintly. "Just make sure nobody ever tries to take it over again." He laughed. "Trust me, man, I like my lawn exactly how it is." Hannah joined us with lemonade. For a while, we just talked, about weather, jobs, the small things normal people discuss. It felt good. Ordinary. Something I hadn't realized I missed. Later that night, I sat on the porch with a beer, watching the sun dip below the trees. The neighborhood was peaceful again, not perfect, not controlled, just peaceful. But as I listened to the crickets and distant laughter of kids playing, my mind wandered back to something Carl said in that mill: "There are more like me." He wasn't wrong. Power hides in plain sight. It wears smiles and suits, HOA badges and corporate titles. And it always waits for people to look away. That's when I made a decision. Not to fight forever, but to teach others how to stand. I expanded the training program into a nonprofit, Project Sentinel. Veterans volunteered, local deputies joined in, even FBI consultants offered workshops. We taught communities how to recognize manipulation, how to challenge unlawful authority, how to protect each other. News outlets picked it up. Navy SEAL turns neighborhood war into national movement. It wasn't about fame, it was about purpose. Hannah became the heart of the organization. Her story inspired hundreds. Every time she spoke at an event, she'd end with the same line: "Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it just says, you don't get to hurt us anymore." And every time, I saw people stand taller after hearing it. 2 years passed. The pain dulled. The nightmares faded. Life settled into something resembling peace. Then one summer evening, I got a letter. No return address. Just a single line of handwriting across the envelope: "We never stop watching." I froze. The old instincts flared. Hannah saw my expression as I opened it. Inside was a photo, me teaching at Project Sentinel. No note. Just the image. She stepped closer. "What is it?" "Probably nothing," I said, tucking it away. "Just someone trying to rattle me." But that night, I couldn't sleep. The next morning, I handed the envelope to Lawson. He frowned. "We'll trace it." But it could just be some nut who read the story online. "Yeah," I said. "Could be." Days passed, and nothing came of it. But something in me shifted. That feeling, the one I thought I buried at the mill, whispered again. Evil doesn't die. It waits. Still, I refused to live in fear. We installed better cameras, reinforced the gates, but life went on. Hannah's laughter filled the house again. We traveled, made friends, lived. And every time I caught myself looking over my shoulder, I'd remember what I fought for: freedom. Years later, when I finally retired from teaching, I sat on that same porch, older, slower, but content. The neighborhood kids, now grown, came by sometimes, calling me Coach. The new HOA, a real one, legal and small, asked for advice once. I just laughed. Keep your rules light, I told them. And never forget, you work for the people, not the other way around. They nodded, a little nervously, probably remembering the stories. As the sun set, Hannah came out with 2 mugs of coffee. She looked the same to me, even after all those years, fierce, beautiful, strong. She handed me a mug and sat beside me. You still think about it? I nodded. Sometimes. But I think more about what came after. She smiled softly. You finally learned how to rest. Maybe, I said. Or maybe I just learned how to fight differently. She leaned her head on my shoulder, the world quiet around us. Do you miss it? She asked. The uniform? The missions? I shook my head. No. But I do miss knowing who the enemy was. She chuckled. Now you just teach people how to spot them before it's too late. Yeah, I said. That's enough for me. We sat there as the last light faded, watching the world we'd rebuilt, scarred, imperfect, but ours. Because peace isn't the absence of war. It's the decision to protect what's worth keeping. And if the day ever came when danger knocked again, well, I still knew exactly where the M4 was.